Honey, I want to tell you something really interesting that I just learned. Alright, so get this. There was a record-breaking tornado very recently. Yes, I'm serious, and it's super cool. On May 21st this year, there was an absurdly powerful tornado that ripped through Greenfield, Iowa. It broke the speed record that the Bridge Creek tornado set back in 1999. That's a gap of 25 years. The reason I didn't know about this during a recent chase is because this tornado wasn't fully studied until recently. It basically just happened. You seem a bit confused. Let's see if I can explain this properly. First, I need to talk about Iowa itself, since a lot of people seem to underestimate it as an active tornado state. Sure, we have Kansas and Oklahoma, which are by far the most prime tornado states, but Iowa is close by. Oh, Texas? Well, Texas is kinda weird. On one hand, it does get the highest sheer number of tornadoes compared to any other state, but that's mainly because it's so huge. You need to understand that Texas is a massive state, and the upper half of it just so happens to bleed into Tornado Alley. But there's also major parts of Texas that don't get many tornadoes, most notably the far west and deep south of the state. When you reach those parts of Texas, you get too close to Mexico and New Mexico, which have too much heat and not enough cold air. You're basically leaving Tornado Alley at that point. Kansas and Oklahoma are considered to be at the top of the tornado state tier since they're in the heart of Tornado Alley and have the most favorable conditions. And Iowa, I reckon, is probably in third place behind those two. Seriously, people really need to recognize Iowa more. It's no joke. It gets an astounding amount of tornadic activity despite being such a small state. The thing with Iowa is that it's a neighbor to Nebraska and Missouri, which both touch Kansas. It's a volatile tornado hotspot. There's also been an ongoing theory in recent years that Tornado Alley has been slightly shifting east, which would make Iowa even more of a tornado magnet. As if that wasn't enough, 2024 has been experiencing a severe tornado outbreak. So severe, in fact, that even the northeastern US is dealing with some of it. And New England isn't exactly known for tornadoes. It's pretty crazy. You see where I'm going with this, right? Conditions this year have been ripe to create some incredible tornadoes, and Iowa recently produced a record breaker. I can't express enough just how big of a deal this is. Okay, I think you get it now. I'll explain the actual tornado itself. Get ready, because I'm about to throw some numbers at you. This obscene tornado had a minimum wind speed of 309 miles per hour and a maximum of 318, though its most consistent and likely wind speed was 313. I know it doesn't sound like this tornado is that big of a deal when you think about the Bridge Creek tornado from 1999. You might wonder, didn't that tornado have a higher maximum wind speed? Well, yes it did, but that's also highly improbable and far too generous. If we look at the exact raw stats, Bridge Creek had a much lower minimum wind speed of 281 miles per hour, and its maximum was a bit higher at 321. But not only did this new Greenfield tornado have a vastly higher minimum at 309, it most importantly had a significantly higher likely wind speed of 313, which it consistently had for most of its run. Bridge Creek's likely wind speed was 302. In conclusion, this means that the Greenfield, Iowa tornado of May 21st, 2024 is the new #1 most powerful tornado ever documented. This thing would have easily wrecked the Dominator 5. Absolutely mind-blowing. Strangely, despite blatantly having the wind speed of an F5, it didn't quite do F5 damage. It was officially classified as a high-end F4, much like the tornado that you and I chased, and the damage it did was also relatively comparable. This means that we still haven't had a truly officially classified F5 tornado since May 20th, 2013. That's not a bad thing, of course. I may be a meteorologist and tornado enthusiast, but I fully understand that we obviously don't want F5s. They're extremely deadly, ruin lives, and probably traumatize people. The longer we go without an F5, the better. I've seen people let their tornado enthusiasm get to their heads. They want F5s because, well, tornadoes are fascinating. And I get that. But they also forget that these monstrous forces of nature are bad. Very, very bad. I don't think anyone, lover of tornadoes or not, would actually enjoy having their lives, homes, and overall well-being threatened by something so destructive and powerful that no one is capable of stopping it. In an ideal scenario, the best tornadoes are the ones that happen in open fields and don't bother anyone. That way you can admire their majesty and no one gets hurt. It's hard to say that I have a favorite historical tornado. Favorite isn't the right word to use. That's bad. But there's one tornado that I have the most interest in. I've mentioned a lot of tornadoes, the deadliest tornadoes of all time, like Tri-State and Bangladesh, the El Reno tornado, which is the biggest of all time, Dead Man Walking in Jarrell, which is probably the scariest. We just talked about Greenfield and Bridge Creek, which are the two most powerful tornadoes of all time. But out of all these tornadoes, there's one that I keep coming back to. One that simply hits different compared to all the rest. The costliest tornado in U.S. history. The F5 that happened in Joplin, Missouri on May 22nd, 2011. This thing was a nightmare straight from hell. And it was a worst-case scenario. This tornado appeared so quickly, so suddenly, and it grew in strength so rapidly. The people of Joplin got several warnings throughout the day, but they were all false alarms. So when the tornado actually struck, it was a boy who cried wolf situation. Many of them were desensitized to the frequent false warnings. To make matters worse, it was around dusk and the tornado was rain-wrapped, making it very difficult to see. A lot of people didn't even know it was about to hit them until it was too late. And as if all that wasn't bad enough, the tornado even spread a deadly fungal infection that affected a few unlucky individuals. There's a gargantuan amount of footage of this tornado online. It's a rabbit hole all on its own. I'm happy to say that Joplin is doing great nowadays. They've had well over a decade to rebuild, and their efforts have really shown. In fact, not only have they recovered, but they built back better than they were before. Although, despite that, there will always be a scar. I meant that literally. The tornado left a physical scar on the ground. If you look at Joplin on Google Earth, you'll see a large chunk of land that has smaller and less vibrant trees. The terrain is distinctly paler than the areas that the tornado didn't hit, which have much more foliage. Joplin also has some driveways that lead to nowhere, for reasons that I'm sure are obvious. Wow, I sure do talk about tornadoes a lot. Am I keeping you from doing something right now? Really? Do you honestly find my obsession with tornadoes that entertaining? Or do you just like listening to the soothing voice of your beautiful wife? Well, that's fine by me. I have a few more things I could talk about. I wanted to mention the recent Greenfield, Iowa tornado again. This thing had one of the most bizarre and freaky visual representations I've ever seen from a tornado. It was another dead man walking tornado, although in this case it was more like an octopus than a man. This tornado had so many visible vortexes that I couldn't even count them all. It's like several eldritch tendrils were dancing around in the funnel like a carousel. There's breathtaking footage of this tornado online, some of which came from a drone. It showed the entire tornado in crystal clear, smooth quality. This tornado spent much of its time in open fields. It even destroyed some windmills. And it barely missed what appeared to be a farmhouse. Whoever lives there is incredibly lucky. You can also see what appears to be dusty streams of air spiraling into the tornado from all around. It's one of the most photogenic tornadoes I've ever seen. You want to know what the third most powerful tornado of all time was? Well, the answer might surprise you. It was actually the El Reno tornado. Go figure. Turns out that the biggest tornado of all time also happened to be the third most powerful behind Bridge Creek and Greenfield. Yeah, really makes me glad it was mostly a rural tornado. Can you imagine if it actually hit urban areas? It almost did. Fortunately, the city of El Reno itself actually avoided the tornado. It passed the city at the south. What's even more of a miracle is that it dissipated just before hitting the state capital, Oklahoma City. It was a close call. Oklahoma sure does get a lot of tornadoes, huh? It's the world's tornado capital for a reason. Especially Moore. You could say that Moore gets more tornadoes than anywhere else. Maybe I should stop now. Want to watch Twister? I know that there are other tornado movies, but none are as great as Twister. It's just too good. And it's getting an HD re-release before the sequel drops, which is so awesome. Oh, I just remembered something. There's this old Nintendo DS game I used to play as a kid called Tornado. I have no interest in seeing the Twister sequel, but either way, R.I.P. Bill Paxton, he was great in Spy Kids 3D.